Roy, how are you, sir?
I am great, thank you.
Now, is it Oppenheim or Oppenheim?
Neither. It's Oppenheim.
Oppenheim. He forgot an N here. Oppenheimlaw.com.
OppenheimLaw.com. Oppenheim is how you pronounce it in Germany, but we're in the United States.
All right. OppenheimLaw.com and South Florida Law Blog.
South Florida Law Blog.
.com. I'll get it right.
Yes.
Eventually. I just got to warm up first. All right. Now, you practice, among other things, real estate law here in the state of Florida, correct?
That is correct.
And you deal with a lot of foreclosures and things of that nature.
Right, but I used to be on Wall Street. I'm a prior Wall Street attorney, so I've seen both sides of this coin very up close.
And what is your deduction from being on both sides? Who's fucking who? Excuse my French. We're on Central, by the way.
There's no doubt that the banks have this attitude that they are too big to be governed, and that they're too big to fail. And too big to be jailed, actually.
Yeah, and obviously, I guess they're too big to fail. Are they too big to fail? They haven't failed?
They won't fail because of moral hazard, which is a simple concept or construct, which basically says that when we make a mistake as a bank, we know that the Federal Reserve that we control will come to our rescue because that is its primary purpose.
Right. All right, let's get down to the situation here locally in Florida. The numbers, I know foreclosure numbers aren't declining. Do you expect them to get greater, or do you expect it to cool off a little bit?
It is now clear that 2012 will be like 2010, which will be the worst year on record in Florida for foreclosures. And that I ran into the clerk of the court in Broward County today in the elevator, and I told him that we had one of the craziest weeks in our lives in the past few weeks signing up new clients, and he told me that they had one of the biggest spikes in income for the clerk's office in probably a year and a half or 2 years because of the number of foreclosures that are now being filed by the banks. The banks have now received carte blanche, metal to the pedal to the metal, full speed ahead by the government pursuant to this $25 billion second bailout of the banks that has just occurred.
So you mean moving full speed ahead in foreclosing more homes?
Absolutely.
Wow. Now, here's the quandary. Once they foreclose these homes, don't these banks, in essence, own the homes themselves?
They absolutely will own the homes. I mean, on occasion, you do get investors who will buy them, and the banks will reduce or drop their pants and take a hit at the steps. And so you do get, again, Wall Street types coming in or sovereign funds from around the world coming in, buying up these properties, cleaning them up, and then reselling them.
Okay, but the difficulty is going to be reselling them, because once you had a home foreclosure, I can imagine the average American is not going to be, they're not going to be creditworthy.
I'm not sure I understand that question.
Okay, so I had you had a fella had his house foreclosed on.
Yeah.
He was behind on payments, blah blah blah. Now he's going to trash his credit, correct?
Absolutely.
Now he's lost his home to the bank. The bank took it. Someone invested some money. They own it. Now they got to sell it. But the majority of people out there that have been foreclosed on are going to have some crappy credit history.
Right. But all the new people coming in, all these new families that are being formed, family formations, kids graduating from college, new immigrants coming into the United States. The American dream is still alive and well. And these people are going to take advantage of a remarkable opportunity to buy into a real estate market that you haven't seen in 100 years. And
that's going to be the boom, right?
Of course, and that's the brilliance of America, the reinvention, the rebirth, and that will happen. And we're a part of that. We're representing people every day who are buying new homes. I mean, obviously, I'm defending folks who are in foreclosure, but I got new people coming in every day who are lowballing and buying real estate, and I'm creating the American dream for them just as much as I'm defending those people who've been screwed by an infrastructure that was just caused by greed and avarice.
Now, people do say that they don't feel the American dream or owning a home is part of the American dream anymore. Do you find that to be true? There
are different variations of the American dream today. I mean, there's no question that one can rent in a big city and be part of the American dream in a heartbeat, or that you can rent a home, no question about it. But I think at the end of the day, new families coming into the United States, kids coming out of college, they still want to be part of the American dream, and that is to own a home and to get it cheap, let it appreciate and make money, through that process. We just had a 100-year kind of flood that has occurred here, and it's literally an event that occurs every 100 years, and it's going to take 10 to 20 years to clear up. I mean, people think this is a 3-4 year event starting in 05, 06, 07, depending on who you ask. But let's say it started in 07 or even 08. We're only into year 4 or 5 of this thing.
Roy Oppenheim joins us, who's a real estate attorney, former Wall Street fellow. Wall Street attorney?
That's correct.
Wow. You're banking, huh? Let's talk about squatting.
Okay.
Is it possible to squat in the state of Florida? And what do you have to do? I have a member of the show here who would be ready to squat right now.
Well, we don't represent squatters, but we do represent people who stand their ground. We represent people who lawyer up, people who realize that you can go after the banks based on their poor documentation. Using the very weapons that they're using to foreclose, you can use those same weapons against them and turn it upon them if you know what you're doing.
What do you mean? How so? I mean, for example, a family gets they've stopped making their payments. They had an ARM and their mortgage skyrocketed. They can no longer afford it. They stopped making payments. I hear, Roy, stories of families that have gone 6, 8 months, a year, 2 years. I heard one guy a couple of weeks ago had said he hadn't paid his mortgage in 5 years. We
represent clients and are defending clients who have not paid their mortgage in 3 or 4 years. And in many cases, I'm not going to say in all cases, but probably in 20% of the cases, I'm representing, you need to understand, hundreds and hundreds of clients, probably close to 1,000 people now. In 20% of our cases, we have had these cases thrown out of court.
What do you mean thrown out? How do you throw out a guy hadn't paid his mortgage in 3 years. I mean,
well, that's only one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is that the banks, in their haste to try and feed this juggernaut of the securitization process of mortgages, did not button up all their documents sufficiently, and thus there are holes in the foreclosure process that allow us to basically get these foreclosures dismissed. Now, their technical arguments, show me the note is euphemistically
right.
One of them. The other is that the securitized mortgages that the president was talking about in the State of the Union, and now this new task force that's been created, there is what's called securitization fraud at a very, very high, large, macro, multi-trillion-dollar level that has occurred. Much of that fraud has been found by people like me, foreclosure defense guys that repeatedly found the robo-signing and the
right.
notary fraud and the impersonations, the kind of stuff that people would normally go to jail for 5 or 10 years. But because you have banks that are committing this kind of fraud on a macro level, we don't have mechanisms in place right now, except during Nuremberg. In fact, we're doing some research. The last time we saw large corporations basically broken up and tried for this kind of egregious conduct goes back to the Nuremberg trials, where big companies were literally eviscerated because of their
right.
involvement with the Third Reich.
Right.
Now, the kind of conduct we're talking about was not necessarily where people were killed, but where their constitutional rights were completely torn apart. And when you commit this kind of fraud and you do it on a systemic basis, these large institutions need to be properly taken down. And right now, we don't have an infrastructure in this country to do it. And
right.
So, go ahead.
To put it simply, what is what was the impetus of this? Is it banks were lending way too much money for families to buy homes that they knew they couldn't afford, and getting them into an adjust? Was it the ARM, the adjustable rate mortgages? Was it we are overfinancing people that can't afford these payments? I mean, at some point, we had a lot of people out there that had a lot of house, more house than they should have been approved for.
That's right, and so you have appraisal fraud. And you have all kinds of other types of fraud. You had people who were lying about their income. You had mortgage brokers who were just telling people how to lie so that they
right.
could make the commission on the loan, so they could sell it to the bank. The mortgage broker selling it to the bank then would package it,
yep.
and it would then be created into a securitized investment, sold onto Wall Street, and then from there it would be packaged. The credit agencies would say the thing was, as good as Swiss cheese, and the next thing you know is pension plans, 401ks, European companies, teachers, garbage workers, who have these pension plans would all, and life insurance companies, of course, would buy these well-vetted supposed investments, and they would continue to buy them, and you had this juggernaut that just continued. And so pure greed and avarice and lack of regulation and people just looking a blind eye constantly is what caused this. And, of course, individuals, when they recognized that they could take advantage of it, jumped on board just as well. But the average guy was at the bottom of this pyramid. I mean, sometimes you have folks in Congress that are blaming the people on the street. The reality is it was the people way, way, way high up the pecking order who caused this process to begin, and they did nothing to stop it.
What was the Roy, the crux of the overinflated values of real estate? Because I know it started maybe 10, 12 years ago, and then we hit a serious bubble where people were buying, they bought a house for $235,000. They looked up the value of it.
The real crux is probably Alan Greenspan allowing interest rates to remain as low as they did for as long as he did.
Right.
And ironically, everyone thought this guy was like walking on water and was God. And today, I think many of his policies are just completely discredited. I
mean, there are people that really did. I guess you could call it some form of greed. But instead of saying, "Hey, this house is worth twice what we paid for it now, we can make out a bandit and sell it and buy a giant mansion," a lot of people just said, "You know what? Let's just sell it, downscale a little bit, and live comfortably." They took advantage of that bubble.
They didn't live comfortably. They bought a house. They bought a boat. They went on vacation. They paid for their kids' schools.
It's comfortable, Roy.
They went out to eat too much. Or they invested in the stock market and they lost it all.
Right.
Which is something else. You have to talk about this past decade. If you put money in 2001 or 2000 and you look at where you are now, you're at the same place.
Right.
And so a lot of people just had really bad timing, and there was a time where people were pulling cash out of their homes, equity out of their homes, and they weren't blowing it. They were putting it in the stock market because people were telling them that was the thing to do. And that became a disaster also.
At some point, there became, I hate to get too political, but was there, obviously, any administration is judged on several of their accomplishments. Percentage of home ownership, minority home ownership, is a huge feather in the cap of any administration. How much of this is politically motivated?
I do remember President Bush and his HUD advisors, that was Housing and Urban Development, were over in China talking about how the number of people, the percentage of Americans had peaked at close to, I think, 80%. It may have been even slightly higher than that, which had been a record in the history of the United States. And so they were very proud of that number. And so there was some political, pressure on both parties to try and push home ownership, because historically the notion was that people who own their homes actually take care of their homes better, improve their neighborhoods, their kids do better in school, the families stay more intact. There's a lot of sociological benefit to having home ownership from a political perspective. And so we were encouraging it, but we were encouraging it at all costs. And we literally ended up throwing the baby out with the bathwater when it came to home ownership. Home ownership is good, but it's not good at the expense of everything else.
I know a guy around the mid-'90s who wasn't making very much money, was able to buy what turned out to be like almost a $300,000 home with a $1,000 down payment, and his credit was sketchy at best. It was a Fannie Mae thing, or it just seems like it was almost anybody could get a home mortgage.
One of the things you see is that whenever the government is going to provide funds for an industry, whether it's housing, healthcare, or education, you have massive bubbles and inflations that are created. If you could negotiate with your doctor the same procedure that he's providing through your insurance company, you usually can get it for half as much if you pay him cash on the barrel or right on the spot. Same thing with education. Because you have these massive multi-billion-dollar government student loan programs, these colleges continue to increase their expenses every single year as if we're not in a recession or in an economic decline. They think they're in a different universe, just like you have that with healthcare. And we had that with real estate also for an extended period of time. Now, where did that money come from? It came from Fannie, it came from Freddie, and it came from, deliberately extremely low interest rates for an extended period of time.
Right. Let's get down to some brass tacks so the average layman can understand. If they, first thing that people do when they stop paying their mortgage, they stop paying it. Am I right? Largely because they had an arm and it just catapulted up.
Believe it or not, some of these arms, when they readjust, are readjusting downward. So I disagree with that assessment.
Okay.
People are stopping to pay because it makes no logical sense to be paying interest on a mortgage where the underlying value has decreased by 50 or 60%.
You're upside down on your house, basically.
You're upside down, right? And so just like the big banks, when they walk away from their deals, and all the big banks that are foreclosing have walked away from multi-billion-dollar deals because they strategically defaulted when they made a logical business decision that it's not in their interest, their shareholders' interest, or in the company's interest to keep paying interest on an asset that is declining in value. Now,
you're right.
We have this duopoly here of sorts where it's okay for businesses to do that, but it's a duality, really. But that for some reason it becomes a religious, moral thing,
right,
not to strategically default on your home because somehow there are moral implications associated with that, which are not associated with making the exact same decision if you were in business. And the reality is that is something that is just created by the banks in order for them to encourage you to make your mortgage payments. And
right.
That's okay that they've done that, but it's not right, and there's nothing religious about it. There's nothing moral about it. And so you just have to make a decision. Are you willing to take a hit on your credit in exchange for standing your ground and not paying your mortgage and eventually moving on? And there are many options that we negotiate and other lawyers like ourselves negotiate for homeowners who make that decision. And so we provide people an opportunity to basically fashion their own bailout, to figure out what options they truly have. And one of the funny things is that when people come into our office, a lot of times they're depressed, they're on Prozac, they're on all kinds of meds, and they look horrific. And after they meet with us and we basically show them that there's massive light at the end of the tunnel, they quit taking their meds, their hair starts growing again, their skin starts looking better, and they start smiling again. And for us, that's really the most important thing that we do.
So strategic default, and we hear companies that do it all the time. It just doesn't make sense. But when you're addressing an individual, a family, who all of a sudden finds themselves holding a $200,000 mortgage on a home that's now valued at $100,000, it doesn't make sense for them to keep paying on unless there's light at the end of the tunnel in terms of we can get the payment where it is manageable. And we do see maybe the values will go back up again. Do you think the values will reach those levels again?
The equation is somewhat complicated, but the first equation is if obviously the value has dropped precipitously, does it make sense to continue making payments? And the answer is maybe. So we have to decide, do we still want the house? If we like the house, would we be willing to rent the house across the street for the same or less money? Okay?
All right.
And if the answer is, I like the neighborhood, I like the schools, we want to stay in this house or stay in a comparable house, can you rent this house across the street for less? That's the first question. If the answer is yes, then it's very logical. Stop making payments and rent the property across the street and do a short sale, get the hell out of this property, or do a strategic default, or even rent out your house while you're fighting the bank and move across the street. I mean, so that would be one option. Second option is, wait a minute. If I was renting the house across the street, it would cost me more than my current house, notwithstanding the fact that I'm underwater. So if you get into your head that you're really just renting your own house, and at the end of the day, one of two things are going to happen. You're going to do a short sale when you don't want the house anymore, or maybe there'll be some massive inflation, some sort of third world type inflation that we may well have one day here in the United States. It hasn't happened yet, and of course, a lot of people keep talking about this inflation and buy gold because it's the economy, the dollar keeps weakening, and we're going to be like a monkey republic, a banana republic one day, and
right.
And if that does happen, you know what? Our houses may become very valuable because if there's massive inflation, then the values will shoot back up. But as long as that does not happen, and we're in either a stagflation or deflation environment, which is what we're in right now, our property values are not going anywhere for an extended period of time. And so you have to say to yourself, am I better off staying in my home and paying what I'm paying, or could I live in a comparable or better home for less if I rented? Many times people say I can live in a better home if I rented, if I moved on. And then that's when looking at doing a strategic default and doing a short sale makes wonderful sense. But in some cases, people don't have a choice. They're now disabled. Their hours have been cut. Maybe they were married and their spouse divorced them, or someone died,
right.
And now they're stuck and they can't pay their mortgage. And so the answer is, what do you do? And that is when you stand your ground and you fight.
Wow. Is there a possibility Like you said, a couple divorces, the one party can't afford the house, they're in a foreclosure. Is it possible for them to, it's possible for you or a lawyer to negotiate a new favorable mortgage? Or do banks want to play?
That would be called a modification, and there is some new money that's now available pursuant to this bank settlement where supposedly the banks paid out $25 billion, which they didn't, by the way. They only paid out about $5 billion, in order to basically get all the robo-signing claims off their back. And the robo-signing is a short way of saying all the fraud claims that they have committed as it relates to impersonation and notary fraud and doing everything else that they have done where they basically committed all kinds of nasty fraud. But having said that, there are formulas that you need to meet in order to be able to modify, and many people just don't have the income to satisfy those requirements today.
Right.
And so, if they have the funds, then or have the income, then there's a possibility of getting like a 2 or 3% interest rate loan when you were paying 6%. And we do that for folks all the time, but many folks are not capable of always doing that.
Roy Oppenheim, OppenheimLaw.com, and your blog, SouthFloridaLawBlog.com. I know that when we discuss you come on the show that you're hesitant to take calls because we have listeners all over the country and laws are different state to state. So I'm just trying to speak in some, more or less generalities in terms of the mess the country's in as a whole.
Well, I don't mind taking a few calls. I mean, let me give you one scenario. We've done this numerous times, and I kind of like it. You have someone who can no longer afford their home. And they've either taken a massive pay cut or they've gotten divorced or something has happened in their life, and they have to basically get regrounded. And so someone decides, I'm going to go to nursing school. Now, nursing school, depending on where you are in your college years, may be another 2 years from when you finish school the first time around, because you kind of have to go back.
Right.
So we've had clients numerous times, and we've had a paramedic do this, and we've had a nurse do this, where they go back to school for about 2 years or 18 months, and they stop paying their mortgage, and they strategically default. They take a hit on their credit, and they retool. And after 2 years, they come out with a wonderful contract from a nice hospital, making, you name it, could be $80,000 a year as a nurse.
Right.
And guess what? Do you think the bank is saying, we're going to throw you out now, or do you think they're going to say, you know what, you now qualify to stay in your home, and we'd like to modify your loan, and we'd like to re-earn your business?
So
what do you think the bank does?
They're gonna keep you in the home.
Yes.
They don't want to hassle. I mean, when these houses are empty, somebody's losing their ass.
Right. So they're thrilled that you've stayed in the house, you've paid the water bill, you paid the electric bill, you paid the pool guy, you paid the bug guy, you cut the lawn, you made sure that you maintained the value of the collateral at its new value, and now you're saying, hey, I am ready to step back into the fray and start have you refinance this with a modification, and we have done that numerous times.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's very powerful.
So the trick is not to panic when you get that notice, that you're being foreclosed on. A lot of people freak out, like you said. They're on, they lose their hair. They're on Prozac. They're drinking more. They've lost their money. All is not lost.
They move out, which is in many times the biggest mistake on earth. We've had people who've moved out and the banks then didn't foreclose, and the property became completely vandalized. And guess who's technically legally liable and responsible for the vandalization if someone gets hurt or falls into the pool?
Yeah.
You.
Wow.
Because you moved out. I mean, I tell people never move out. Even if you do move out, put a tenant in, put a family friend in. Do not vacate the premises until the foreclosure is complete. It makes no sense, and it hurts your neighbors. It hurts the neighborhood, and it's illogical to leave.
Yeah, it doesn't make much sense, does it?
People are afraid. They get served by a process server. It's very intimidating. They don't understand it, and they freak.
Yeah. And then once you get that notice, what is your best advice? A lot of people just, say, screw it, I'm just going to file this thing away, I'm not going to answer. And then you go off and they get a summary judgment against you and you're screwed.
The first thing they have to do, and it says it right on it, is just, for God's sakes, call a lawyer, okay? Call a lawyer that knows what they're doing.
Right.
And, you can, Google's very, very helpful for that. You really can, you spend 10 minutes, you type in foreclosure defense attorney, you type in, stand my ground or strategic default or anything that comes to mind and then you look and you see who's had good experience and who's really had a track record. And in every state, there are a bunch of successful guys now. I mean, when we were at the bottom of the barrel in the legal community, now we're at the top of the heap. I mean, it's really funny.
Roy Oppenheim is on the phone. OppenheimLaw.com. That's the best place to go if you live in the state of Florida and you're in the situation. My co-host has a question for you. Go ahead.
Hey, Roy. Question. I have a few friends that are only probably underwater about 10 to 20 grand. What would be your advice? Because they're kind of feeling the same thing of a lot of people of, screw it, I'm underwater, I need to bail on this. But is that so much that they should bail, or should they wait it out? Is that close enough?
That is close enough. In fact, it's sufficiently close that they could refinance under some new government programs where they could just get their interest rate lowered, not even have to do a modification, not have to default, not hurt their credit. In fact, doing all that could be counterproductive under those circumstances. They should be refinancing in the traditional way, and even though they're underwater, some of these new refi programs allow you to be as much as 125% below the value of the house.
Crap.
You can actually be 25% underwater and still refinance.
No kidding.
Okay, so really the best advice for those that are that close is wait it out. It may come back. I mean,
and refinance and try and get your interest rate reduced.
Right.
Okay.
And banks are willing to work with you on that, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, listen, they're borrowing money from the Fed at 0.00 like 2%, which means that's less than 0.25% they are borrowing money at. So if they lend it to you at 1%, they're making 500% on the money.
Wow.
Wow.
Well, they put it that way.
0.2 times 5 is 1%. And so if they lend to you at 2%, that's 10 times they're making on their money. I mean, they're borrowing the money almost at nothing. So it's very easy for them to lend you money at 2% and actually still make money.
Roy, the clients you have, are you seeing? I mean, what percentage are getting are just opting for or does a strategic default make more sense than negotiating with a bank?
Well, strategic default and negotiating with the bank are par and parcel. Once we strategically default, we get the bank's attention. It's kind of like martial arts, Asian, Far Eastern martial arts. You use the size and weight of your opponent to your advantage. The problem is we can never really get the bank's true attention and get them to focus on helping us until we are in default. Once we're in default, they have the resources to help you. Until that time, they really are not interested in talking to you. They just want to try and keep squeezing every interest dollar out of you that they possibly can.
Right.
Once you stop paying, you truly get their attention, and you truly can use their size against them in many, many ways.
All right. Roy Oppenheim, thank you very much. By the way, you tweet as well, OP Law, at OP Law, right?
Yes, at OP Law, that's correct.
And the website is OppenheimLaw.com. It's OPP. Am I spelling that right?
Yeah, you got it right.
OPPENHEIM law.com.
And then you have the South Florida Lawblog.com, which is also a great way to find us.
Cool. Roy, I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
I appreciate it also. Thanks, guys.
All right. Be good, Roy. Thank you.
Take care.